Good evening. I'm Susan Lindsay, the Program Director for Ask Childhood Cancer Foundation. Welcome to our fairly new webinar series we started this fall. It is called Ask Us About, and it's a virtual discussion series designed to present topics important to families going through diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship. Our topic this evening is positivity. So we're going to talk about how to respond to tough emotions and challenging situations with a positive approach. Wherever you are on this journey, we know there have been significant emotional challenges for your entire family. So we hope that you come away this evening feeling that you have more tools in your toolbox to proactively support your emotional needs and those of your family as well. So a few pieces of housekeeping before we get started. We are recording this webinar so that it's available online later for those who couldn't make it this evening. We will pause for discussion and comments throughout. Because it's a webinar, your video will remain off. So you will just see Lisa and I this evening. But we can, I can unmute you. So if you would like to ask a question, you can, along the bottom of your screen, you'll see some icons. So there's one that's a hand. If you would like to be unmuted to talk, just raise that hand. And when I feel like we've gotten to a good place, I'll unmute you. You can also ask questions in the Q&A, or there's also a chat. So if you just have comments, you can also type them in the chat. So I'll be monitoring that, and we will do our best to get to everybody's questions within the hour. We have folks joining us from all across Virginia, so we're super excited. Wherever you are from tonight, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. It's my pleasure to introduce Ask Education Support Navigator, Lisa Meares. Before coming to Ask, Lisa worked for 5 years as a special education teacher and another 4 years as a social emotional special education teacher. She recently completed her Master's of Human Development. Lisa's classroom experience provided daily opportunities to practice responding positively to children who had difficulty controlling their emotions appropriately. I feel like that's probably a little bit of an understatement. She believes that with practice, we as adults can work on controlling our own emotional reactions and responses and respond positively, and then teach the children in our lives to do the same. So let me be the first to say that this is not easy. It is really difficult for everyone. And I say that as a parent myself, and, with a child who has kind of expresses his emotions very intensely, that it's challenging, and we know that. So kudos to you for being here or listening later, and it being something that you are interested in working on, because it's hard. So Lisa, I told you after we had already named the webinar and, started marketing it, I said, I don't know if this was the right name, because I think when we say positivity, we often immediately think about toxic positivity, and like, I didn't want people to think we're just saying, if you're just more positive, it'll go better, because that is not what we're saying. So I wanted to start this evening talking about what toxic positivity is and why it's not helpful. And then we'll move into what we are going to focus on.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. I have some slides to help facilitate this. Oh, I started on the end. I'll thank you at the end. So yeah, I felt the same way, Susan, when you tapped me and said, are you willing and comfortable talking about positivity? My first thought was positivity, okay. Especially, coming from the world of education, they do really, at times, it can easily creep into this form of toxic positivity without the intention of toxic positivity. So the question of what is it and how do we handle it or reframe it is really important. So I want to talk first about kind of defining it. And toxic positivity is this sort of pressured or forced generalized forced feelings of happiness or needing expectation of gratefulness in a situation. And when you're doing this, whether it's, most likely we hope that it's an unintentional, but that it oftentimes leads to invalidating feelings or not leaving space for any other feelings other than happiness and gratefulness in a situation, which then can lead to shame and guilt for feeling anything other than happy and grateful for a situation. So a lot of times, and I'm guilty of doing this too, of being in a situation with friends, or even, in self-talk, saying, well, the situation could be worse. Why are you being so negative about it? We'll get over this. It's really not a big deal. And in the moment, that doesn't seem like a lot. But if you sit back and you really sit with that feeling, or you are in yourself hearing those, and you're having a big emotion or a big feeling where, you're incredibly sad or at a loss, especially when you're going through something as intense as, a cancer diagnosis and treatment and survivorship, hearing things like, well, it's curative, so it could be worse. You're going to be fine. You're sitting there with all those feelings, quite possibly. Maybe you are feeling like, yeah, it could be a lot worse. Or you might also be feeling like, this feels incredibly awful, and this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me or to my child. And so hearing those words can be really demoralizing and really demeaning to that situation. And then you think, well, am I, really, is it really not a big deal? But I feel like it's a big deal. And then you're just sitting with all these negative emotions. So it's really better to kind of think about it as a way of um, leaving space to acknowledge whatever feelings might be there. And you don't have to know what those feelings are, but just acknowledge that there's other feelings besides happiness and gratefulness. And so kind of looking out and saying, it's okay that you're not okay. I understand that things are difficult, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, or that this is a really hard experience. And I want to know, how can I support you? So just kind of reframing it in a way that, you're not belittling the experience that somebody's going through, whatever it may be. But you're also bringing something to the table, even if it's just leaving space for future conversations and future feelings.
I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions or comments before we move on. No? Okay. So, Lisa, you have worked with many children who experience what's called emotional dysregulation, or difficulty managing their emotions in an appropriate manner. Children who act impulsively, with intensity, and often like angry out, and maybe physical demonstrations of their emotions as well. So can you share with us what you learned from your experience as a social emotional special education teacher working with such intense emotions that would be helpful for parents who, while maybe not dealing with it quite at the level of intensity that you did, still, probably a decent amount of intensity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all feelings, emotions, it's a spectrum. It's all relative to you for how the intensity. My experience is certainly going to be different, even if I was engaging with another someone that had a similar background. So that's always important to keep in mind. But the big thing that I like to take away from my years working with students that have emotional dysregulation on a frequent basis is that all behaviors are a form of communication. And what that really just means that as the adult, it is really important, and it's our job to be kind of the observer and the facilitator in developing, acknowledging and learning and understanding what their feelings are, validating those feelings, and understanding how those feelings are creating different behaviors or choices that they're making behind those behaviors. So I like to think about, and this is going to come from a teacher lens for a moment. Um, there's the example, or let me start first by looking at, I have the feelings wheel up here. And this is something that was in our last webinar, not the same exact thing, but it's a feelings wheel. And Ashley Morgan Sukup did a really great job of talking about just how important it is that we acknowledge feelings are really complex. And, generally we start thinking, especially on the younger end, that, you might feel happy, sad, mad. The wheel also shares things like scared or loved or anxious. But then if you start diving deeper into those feelings, they're a lot more complex. If I came onto this Zoom tonight and I'm feeling really sad, it's really different for me feeling sad if I'm lonely, how I'm going to behave versus if I am feeling a sense of grief and loss. The way that I'm going to react to that feeling is going to look very different. So I might, if I'm really lonely, I might be seeking out others. Or if I'm feeling grief or loss, I might be kind of isolating myself, or finding self-soothing activities to do, to kind of help myself through those feelings. But when I'm thinking about this, from the lens of an adult helping a child, I think about, like you mentioned, we're not perfect. We're all human, and we're going to have feelings and emotions when we see our child have intense emotions and feelings, and then the reactions that they have with those intense feelings. And so I think about the example of being in a classroom where if a student's upset, they might crumple up a piece of paper or rip it up as an assignment and throw it to the ground. Now, as the teacher, as the adult in the room, it's my job to notice that behavior. And I might be starting to speculate, and I could very quickly easily take that on a personal level of, oh my gosh, I just taught this incredible lesson. Why can't this child now take what I taught and implement it on this piece of paper? But the reality is that their feelings and their actions don't necessarily have anything to do with how great of a lesson I taught. And the reality is that I could have been a perfect teacher, and there's still going to be somebody that I didn't reach. And I think the same thing is true for parents. You could be theoretically the perfect parent, and there's still going to be a time where your child doesn't react the way that you might expect them to react. And so then it's your job as the adult to kind of look at, well, why is that choice being made, and what's the feeling behind it? So in the situation of the crumpled up and throwing the paper on the floor, I might be approaching that from the point of, my assumption in that situation is that they might be feeling frustrated. That's a signal to me that they're communicating, I feel frustrated. I don't want to deal with this assignment anymore. So I'm crumpling it up and I'm throwing it away. And when I'm approaching them and talking to them about it, if they're in a space to talk about it, I might actually find out that actually they weren't frustrated at all. Maybe they were over on the anxious end of the feelings wheel, and they were actually feeling embarrassed because the student was more of a perfectionist and they made a mistake on their paper, and they didn't know how to correct that mistake. So rather than asking for help, they didn't have the tools to ask for help, or know that there's another piece of paper that they could go grab. Their decision was to react to that feeling of embarrassment and crumple it up. My job in that situation would be to, validate the feeling that they're feeling, because it's not my job or my place to say that's not embarrassing, because for them that feels very real to them. And I would never tell anybody that their feeling wasn't a valid feeling, because it's their own experience of the world. But rather I'd say, okay, it's okay that you're embarrassed. that you didn't feel that this was going your way. What can we do next time? Because crumpling it up and throwing it away, did it solve your problem? Is your worksheet now done? Is it better? Is it, did the mistake go away? No. So what can we do next time to do that? So it's really just learning to work with your child to determine where the feelings are, how it got communicated, and then what's a better way to do it, and to handle that feeling and communicate their needs in the future.
I find, I either read it or somebody said it at some point, but the idea that when a child is acting out from our perspective is
Mhm.
acting out or having difficult behavior, that it is actually a time that they generally need more connection, not less connection. But I think as an adult, the human reaction is like, I would like to distance myself from your intense emotion. Um, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that can, yeah, I would think that's true. The gut reaction sometimes is you don't want to be involved in it, or that you have your own feeling too, because especially if it is your own child, that maybe you're having a really intense reaction too. And so they're emotionally dysregulated, and your emotional regulation might be varying at that point, and that might look like you wanting to step back, that might look like you wanting to rise up, and or not wanting to rise up, but you reacting in that moment to rising to that situation. So I think about like flight, flight, freeze, kind of stepping back as an initial reaction. Yeah, that makes sense. It just depends on the situation and how comfortable you feel in that moment. Um, or if it's your child and you have these intense emotions, because you see your child going through something very intense and emotional, that you might have that fight moment where you're going to rise, in your dysregulation right there with them. Um, and that's not unnatural either. It's actually something that has to be worked on. It's something that I still work on even as an adult, and someone that's, had the experience that I've had, that recognizing in yourself where you are and how you're feeling, and or you might even just freeze in the situation and shut down and not know how to react, or feel overwhelmed from the emotion that's going on, going, well, what do I do? My child is having a tantrum. They're throwing their toys all over the room. I've not seen this behavior before, so I'm just kind of frozen in this moment. And I think all of those, and a range within that, is very natural. And it's just learning to recognize that that's natural and that's okay. Um, but where do you want to go with that from there?
So that kind of leads us to my next question, which is,
Mhm.
um, parents are often figuring out how to deal with their children's emotions while managing their own emotions at the same time. It's all happening simultaneously. So it's an incredibly difficult amount of emotions that can be swirling around. And especially when you throw in, when we're talking about like diagnosis and treatment or survivorship issues, and it's really big emotions. So what are the first steps to responding to a child or teen's emotions when one's own emotions are so intense? And I did see a Q&A, so I'm gonna get to that too, but
Do
I'll
you
let
want
you
to do
finish.
that first, or sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead and answer, and then
Okay.
we'll get to the.
So the thing I always say is you want to take your own temperature first, and also take your child or teen's temperature. And I don't mean go grab a thermometer and actually take a temperature. I mean more of what I have on the screen, which this is a more basic form. Again, it's not as detailed in our feelings wheel would be, but just giving you the general idea of the first thing you need to do is recognize, the very first thing before you take your temperature actually is you want to just make sure, is your child's behavior or intense emotions leading to a behavior that is unsafe for themselves or unsafe for others? If the answer is yes, then we need to intervene in a way that's going to support them, to be more safe. Um, and you might need assistance with that, and that's okay. And that might look different depending on the situation. I would imagine hopefully that's not happening too often in the home. I think of that a lot because I was working in a program where that was a more regular occurrence, where a child might be unsafe. And what I mean by that is that they might be um, throwing something at someone else, or throwing things in the room that are larger objects, and it could be a risk to hitting someone else. Would be an example that I could think of. Um, and if that's not the case, or they are throwing something, but it's like stuffed animals, well, the risk of getting hurt by a stuffed animal is pretty low. So then you want to take into consideration, where are you? Are you not necessarily happy about the situation? Because again, your emotions are probably intense in this. Um, but are you calm? And if you're not calm, how do you get yourself to calm? Um, and it's okay in these situations to not feel that way. That's, like we were just saying a few moments ago, is that that's normal, especially when it's someone that you love and care for on a daily basis. And you've seen them go through so much and continuing to go through so much. Um, that's to be expected, that you might not feel calm when they're having an intense emotion. But we need to figure out, what can I do, or what can you do as an individual to feel calm so that you can support your child. And I always think about, if you've flown on a plane before, they always tell you when you're getting ready to take off, that you need to put on your oxygen mask first before putting on your child's in the case of an emergency. And it's the same situation here, where you need to put on your oxygen mask first, or make sure that you are calm or able to stay calm in the situation before you can help calm down your child. Um, and if you're not able to, then that's totally okay. Then you need to consider, is there someone else in the home, another adult that can maybe step in and I can tap out to feel, to go help myself get to a more regulated state so that I can go back and support, or that adult can go back and just help my child, or their child, to um, find their calm, and be more mindful, and aware of their emotions and their choices associated with those emotions. If you don't have that other adult, because a lot of times it might just be you and your child, or children, um, and you still have that intense emotion while they're having that intense emotion, then again, as long as that child is safe, then you're saying, okay, I'm going to just model what I would expect my child to do, and what I'm going to be teaching my child, and I'm teaching my child to do, which is saying, I see that you need help. I am feeling frustrated. I'm feeling angry. I need to take a moment for myself. And I would be as explicit as possible in that situation. If you have your cell phone nearby, I might grab that and say, I'm going to set a 3-minute timer, and I'm going to go to this spot, and I'm going to help myself calm down. It might be I'm going to help myself with some breathing. It might be I'm going to journal for a few minutes, or listen to some calming music, something that's going to help me, that I know helps me to feel calm. And that's a great way to model to your child, this is the expectation of it. These feelings are okay and they're valid to have, they're real. I have them as an adult. And I need to handle them so that I can then support you in handling your emotions. So again, in that sense, you're helping them too, especially when they're prior to their teen years. That's kind of facilitating the co-regulation. We have these really great things called mirror neurons that help in those younger years with our children. When they see what we're doing, it's almost monkey see, monkey do. As they're getting older and more verbal, you're going to see less of it. But they're still going to do things. So if your child is escalated and you're just sitting there doing some breathing nearby, their mirror neurons, whether they realize it or not, are going to start matching your breathing as well. And you might, if you're in a place too where you're not too intensely emotional yourself, if you're able to, in a calm way, make that note, like I mentioned with what I would do in the classroom with students of, I notice you doing, and maybe it's making a fist. That tells me that you might be angry. Is that true? And they might tell you right away, like, yes, I'm angry. Or they might not say anything. So you might have to prompt them and ask if that's true. And a lot of times I find that if I have to ask if it's true, or if I say a feeling that I think they might be feeling, if the child is in a semi-regulated state, or even if they are pretty escalated but able to verbalize with me, um, that they're going to tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm right. And they'll correct me and say, no, I'm frustrated, or I'm really upset and I'm sad about this issue. And they might be able to verbalize it, they might not, but at least it gets you on the right path to beginning the steps of regulating yourself and your child.
I have a great example of the
Yeah.
mirroring that I witnessed once. So
Oh,
with
please share.
my kids have done taekwondo for years, and so they started when they were younger, and they were in elementary school, I think, at this point. But the studio has really did like really little kids, like 5-year-olds. Um, and I remember being there for my kids' class and seeing over on another mat, like a 5-year-old just throwing a tantrum. And it was just him and the master. And the master just sat calmly, in the middle of the mat. He didn't like argue with him. He didn't try to go get him. He didn't, and I just thought to myself watching this, well, like, that's not going to work. I was thinking, like, he's probably going to have to do more than that. But it was amazing to watch. I mean, the child came over and like calmed down and sat like he was sitting, and they were breathing together. And I was like, well, it was pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I found that it is really weird to see, and that happened to me a lot in the school system, where kids would feel really dysregulated, and a lot of times it was their emotions and their feelings, the way that they were behaving was they didn't feel a sense of control over the situation. And so I might even ask, you were talking about how he chose a spot in the room and that child was able to come to him. If I notice a child in a particular area, I might say, can I come sit next to you or across from you? And that gives them a little bit right away, a little bit of control of, hey, I'm seeing you, I want to be with you, but I'm also giving you an option of where I'm going to be in near your space. I'm not totally in your space. And then I just kind of, depending on where they are, sit and breathe with them, or start engaging if they're willing to engage. So yeah, that it works. It's weird, you wouldn't think so, but try it. Don't knock it till you try it.
We'll pause here. Any questions before we move on to the next slide? Okay. So now what's the next step after this?
Yeah. So I'm calm. Now what do I do? So this is, again, you're continuing to observe and read your child's behaviors, because that's going to tell you a lot about how they're feeling. So you're going to want to pay particular attention to any changes in breathing, because if they're really escalated, chances are they're breathing really fast because their heart's racing. Or it might be changes in energy levels. And when you're thinking energy levels, you're thinking both verbal and physical, or either or, depending on the situation. That might be they're escalated, they're yelling, they're screaming. They might be giving explicitives depending on the age and vernacular. It might be more physical, where they're kicking, punching, or throwing things. If you start seeing a de-escalation in their verbal, so their voice is coming down lower, or they're talking even less or not at all, they're kind of physically moving less, they're more physically fatigued, in really, really extreme situations, if the physical has been going on for a long, prolonged period of time, you might even see your child fall asleep. So you might have to pause, because if they do have a really intense emotional outburst, and I'm talking like 20-30 minutes outburst, especially when they're younger, having that intense emotion, it takes a large toll on your body. So it might be a physical fatigue that they're shutting down, and you might have to pause before you go back and process. And then you're also checking in, if you're noticing these changes in their breathing and their energy levels. How are they responding when you give them those short verbal explicit prompts? So if you're giving an expectation, or you're offering, like I mentioned, I'd like to come sit next to you. Can I sit in front of you, or can I sit next to you? And if your child's able to respond to that, and say, you can sit next to me, or your choice, then that tells me, okay, you might be ready to start beginning the next steps of calming down and de-escalating and processing what's happened and what our feelings were. If there is no response, or it becomes a respike in our energy levels, or our breathing, then that tells me, okay, we gotta circle back, and you might be at that point trying to, if you've practiced other strategies that work for them, things that calm them in the past, that might be an opportunity for them to engage, for you to say, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to play with your squishy, or to do a puzzle, and then I want to check in. And you set a 5-minute timer, and then you try again. And once you see that they're able to respond and they're calming down, as I mentioned, then that's when you want to start checking in and processing those feelings and their choices. And, again, it's very explicit conversation. And by that, I mean like really direct, saying, how are you feeling? What happened to cause that feeling? What was your choice when you had that feeling? Did that choice help you? Why or why not? So for like example, if you've had dinner, you just finished dinner, and your kid looks at you and says, I want ice cream for dessert. And well, you don't have ice cream, or it's not an option tonight. So you tell them, no, you can't have ice cream tonight. We don't have any. And their feelings somewhere sad, upset, frustrated that they're not getting the ice cream that they wanted. Didn't have control over the dessert that they wanted, or the food that they wanted to eat. So their choice might be to start screaming or yelling. And most likely that's because I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but I think about the way I learned about this is thinking of it as like you're burning a CD. So when you are burning a CD and you're playing a CD that's been burned, it's playing the same track. So if you are having the same feeling that's really intense, that's sad or upset or angry, the next part on that track, the next track that's going to play after those feelings is going to be that reaction to scream and to get a tantrum, because the next track might have been that you got what you wanted. And so you have to rewrite that CD. And that's why I talk about it burning a CD. So you have to kind of write over it by going through this whole process of talking about those feelings. Well, you wanted this ice cream. You were feeling really frustrated that you didn't get the ice cream you wanted. So we're following along on their CD, on each track, playing through each song and saying, what was your choice? Well, I threw a tantrum. Did that tantrum get you the ice cream that you wanted? And hopefully they answer no. Hopefully you didn't give in, but I wouldn't blame you if some nights the answer was, yeah, I gave in. Because again, we're not perfect. And I wouldn't expect this to go perfect or flawlessly, or even after one time of doing this, that it's going to go perfectly wonderful, because it takes time. to rewrite over something. But that when you're processing through all of that, helping them to recognize, well, that didn't help me get what I wanted. So then thinking, okay, well, next time you have that feeling, whether it's over ice cream or a different dessert or something that makes you feel really sad or frustrated, what would be a better choice than throwing this tantrum that might help you to feel better? And that might be where you're bringing in different strategies, things that are going to help them feel calm, and feel happier. Um, and maybe they're not going to be thrilled because they still don't get that ice cream that they want, or whatever it is that they wanted in that situation. But it's helping them to kind of recognize, validating that that feeling is there. Again, nowhere in there in the process am I saying like, that's not a big deal that you didn't get ice cream for one night for dinner, because to them that is a big deal. Um, and just letting them know that that's okay. You can be angry, you can be frustrated over any situation. It's not just ice cream. I don't know why I'm craving ice cream in January, but that I guess that's where my brain is at right now. Um, that, figuring out what's the way that I can help meet my needs, as far as my feelings go, to feel a little bit better about what's happening over the lack of control of dessert, or if they're going through treatment, what is, the situation. They don't have control over appointments and infusions, but they can maybe control what they're doing during their infusion time, or earning something for if they don't like getting poked. I know a lot of our child life specialists have a really great like poke plan, put into place that help, kids to earn something for, sitting still and doing a good job while they wait for, getting access and getting poked. Because I know that's, I can imagine that that is not a comfortable situation, and especially when you don't have control, that can be really frustrating and really, upsetting. So giving some sort of choice over what you can work towards, or earn over doing the task that has to be done, can be really beneficial. And it's something that takes a lot of time, but, definitely works with a lot of practice.
I want to circle back real quick to
Yeah.
the rewriting the CD,
Yes.
because I think a challenge that I have heard come up more than once, with families is that when a child is in treatment, the answer is yes to everything, because
Mhm.
they're going through cancer treatment, which is totally understandable. And
Mm.
then, you move into survivorship and trying to get back into, a normalcy, a new normalcy. And normal is not yes to everything. And so that's a big CD to rewrite. I mean,
That's
and
a
I imagine,
couple multi-album,
yeah.
multi-disc album. Um, But yeah, I mean, I would recommend, if possible during treatment, to try not to say yes to everything, because the research is there that shows that kids really do benefit from structure. And sometimes that structure looks like setting boundaries and not saying yes to everything, as tempting as that might be. Because you don't ever want to see your child suffer or go through anything. So of course you want to do whatever you can to make them feel good. Um, but we want to try to think about the bigger picture. Um, because you're right, if that happens and you don't do that and you do say yes to everything, it is going to be a really big rewrite. And it's going to be likely that there's going to be a lot more emotional, outbursts and and intensity in those outbursts. Um, and so that's where it's going to be really important to be consistent in, how calm you are responding to it, and going through this process, and helping your child to process those feelings and emotions, and understanding the emotions or the choices behind those feelings and emotions. Um, so you can say yes to everything. I don't know what I would do in that situation. I want to say that I would stay strong and I wouldn't do it, but I'd probably be the parent that would go ahead and say yes to everything, and then on the other end be going, oh gosh, now I have to help them relearn what no means. So it's definitely something to consider if you're going through it, and if you've already been through it and you're on the other end and you're saying, oh no, I did this. It can be rewritten. It just is going to take time and consistency.
So mindfulness it can be kind of a trendy word, I feel like, but that said, I think there is a lot of value. I found personally, there's a lot of value in learning some mindfulness kind of techniques, and it is a tool for sure. Can you talk to us a little bit about what mindfulness is, and how it can be helpful? Because I think the piece of like dealing with your own emotions as the adult and parent, in order to then be able to handle a child's intense emotions, it's just so fundamental. It's like you really can't handle the child's emotions if you can't get hold of your own.
Yes. And before I deep dive too much into what mindfulness is, I forgot I wanted to talk a little bit about have a handy dandy little thing on my next screen that does talk about connecting our logic brain to our emotional brain, our feelings or emotional brain. That's good too for Susan, when you were talking about if you do have especially in a situation where you have your child is having a lot of intense emotional outbursts. Maybe you did say yes all throughout treatment, and now you have to rewrite that. A part of being mindful might look like helping them to be aware of why their brain is doing this. Maybe I didn't do my slides right. I thought I had it right. I'll come back to it then. Give me a second. Let me find it. Here it is. This is what I wanted to pull up. Is looking at how the brain works and why we want to do mindfulness. And so thinking about it, I always taught my kids this hand model of the brain, because it's something that's really handy and can go with us anywhere, because mindfulness is really just being aware of what's going on in our brain, in our feelings and our emotions. And I'll go back and review a little bit about it, but I like to think about it as being my hand. And so if I have my hand up in front of me, I have here is my brainstem kind of along the middle of my hand and my wrist. And this is kind of like your basic human functions. So like this is what is helping me to breathe, helping my heart to keep beating, things like that, that my brain does without me even thinking about it. It's not really something that I'm conscious about. And then over here, I have my thumb. And this is where we talk about that flight, freeze, or all those really intense emotions live. And then at the top, I have my logic thinking brain. And so when I come in here and I fold in my feelings brain, part of my brain, sorry, the feelings part of my brain, where I store all those big feelings, all those emotions. And then up top, I have here my logic brain that helps me process those feelings and those emotions when it's closed. This is kind of me when I'm calm and I'm ready to engage and have a conversation, kind of like I am in this moment here with all of you in the webinar. Now, if all of a sudden I have a really big, intense emotion, I might have this moment where we call it, or what I would teach my kids is you're flipping your lid. And that's simply, I would show it with my hands like this, it flips. And that's because I had this really intense emotion and my logic brain didn't know how to handle that yet. So it flipped open, and now I no longer have a direct connection because I don't have that CD track written yet to help process the from my logic brain. So that's why I'm going to need this mindfulness to help me get reconnected and to be more mindful and aware of what those emotions are going on behind. So to get back to where you mentioned what is mindfulness, it is really just being aware of those thoughts and those feelings that are going on in your brain. and using that thinking brain to help you make appropriate corresponding changes or choices, sorry, changes to those choices if they're not appropriate behaviors. And a lot of that can be done through mindfulness. And there's lots of different ways to approach mindfulness. Like you said, there's it's kind of like a zing word that's going around. But it is something that is important and does help us to regulate. I know I mentioned earlier, but the webinar that Ashley Morgan Sukup did, the last one on anxiety and stressors, she did a really great job about talking about a lot of different examples and ways that you can be mindful and of your emotions and ways to cope with those emotions. But one way is to really just be the big deals or takeaways would be to be intentional and proactive in your mindfulness. And so that, you know, right now I am calm. I'm in a place where I could practice my mindfulness skills. I could be practicing my breathing, my strategies that help me to feel calm when maybe I'm not feeling so calm. It's just really important to practice, because then when I do have that moment where my lid flips, it's a little bit quicker each time for me to get back to my logic center. So I'm not flipping and having such intense emotional reactions as often. And the emotions are maybe not as big each time. So the more that I practice, the more that I'm mindful of how I'm feeling and the choices behind it, the less likely my lid is to flip. So again, there's that power in identifying, naming, validating the feeling that you are having and coping with that. So one example, well, I'm going to give two examples. But the first one that I like to do or have done in the past with students is called box breathing. And I would always tell my students that whenever they're doing any sort of mindful activities with me, they have an option to, if they feel comfortable enough, to close their eyes. Or if they don't feel comfortable enough closing their eyes, I just ask them to either pick a spot on the floor or pick something in the room that's not moving. And for something like box breathing, I'm simply teaching them to make a box, to breathe in and breathe out. So they might be counting with their hands. And again, I'm modeling it as the co-regulator, as someone that's helping them to learn and to practice the skill. So if this is your first time learning it, that's okay. This is a good takeaway. You want to start by breathing in, and when you're breathing in through your nose. When you breathe out, you want to be breathing out through your mouth. And in the in-between of breathing in and out, you're simply holding that. And you're hopefully while you're doing this, you're not letting your mind wander too much, and you're just focusing on how fast or really how slow you're breathing. I find a lot of children tend to breathe quite quickly through this at first, especially if they, whether they're in practice or when they are dysregulated. A gut reaction is kind of be to breathe quickly. And that's where it's going to be really important as the adult to kind of help co-regulate and help demonstrate that breathing. So if I'm doing this, I'd be breathing in, and I'm going to make my box. I'm just going to go through it. I'm going to breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. And then I'm going to breathe out of my mouth, sorry. And then I'm going to pause, just hold that out for 4. And I've made my box as I did that. I'm not going to do it just once. I'm going to do that several times. And then I'm going to ask myself and my student or my child, how are you feeling? You know, where was your breath? Was your mind wandering? Are you feeling, and how are you feeling after that? And that might lead to doing different exercises that are a little bit more focused, such as imagining a peaceful place in nature where they're doing some visuals. And I know, again, Ashley did a really great one to to imagine your favorite place, but you can also imagine something like a peaceful place in nature, and it could be real, could be made up, could be something that you saw in a picture on social media. Really just anything that helps to ground you and make you feel more calm, take you away from whatever that was an escalating or intense emotion, and bring you back to a calmer state. So just practicing being aware and being mindful of where you're at, where you're feeling and how your body is reacting to that feeling.
We'll pause for any questions or comments. I do think I will not profess to like be super consistent in practicing mindfulness. But when I do, even if it's just, like at a stoplight or, I don't think it has to be this like big thing, like, no, I'm going to practice mindfulness. You can just like have little moments in your day where you're kind of, taking a moment to check in with yourself.
Absolutely. And I picked this one in mind thinking about when, again, when you have those really long infusion days, or when you're in the hospital and you can't, get outside necessarily, you can use your imagination to get outside, just even if it's just for a few minutes, because you don't always have control. And this helps you to have a little bit of control in a moment, that you don't have so much over.
And I think a beginning really can be as simple as like, I'm not gonna yell back. Like that may be all it is at first. Like, and it may take every ounce of your, energy and self-control, but it's like, but I know in my logical mind, that's not the appropriate response here. So even though that's what I want to do, like I'm mindful enough that I'm not going to respond by yelling. And that may be as far as you get,
Yep,
for a while.
absolutely. Maybe you're just being mindful that you are not ready for supporting the situation in that moment. And that is okay, 100%. That is a great first step. If you can do that, then you're on the right track. Absolutely.
Um, Other helpful resources for when kids have intense emotions?
Yeah. So other things that you can do, there are a lot of really great resources out there, that look into, when I feel I can. Um, and so I thought this was a great one. And this one is from the same place actually where I found the peaceful nature wholehearted counseling, or wholehearted school counseling. Um, she does a really great job of providing, there's some free resources, and then there's also some that you can purchase if you so choose. If you have an Instagram account, she does occasionally do freebie giveaways. I used to do a lot of those because there's a lot of different activities that would be involving practicing different breathing exercises or processing your feelings and your emotions. Kind of checking off and looking at, when you have these different feelings, what are the things that can work for you? Because what works for me, when I feel really angry, might be to go for a walk, and get some fresh air. Well, Susan, for you, it might be talking it out and just sitting down in the moment saying, I'm not going to feel better about the situation until we can sit down and hash out whatever our problem is. And it's really figuring out, or you have to journal it first, whatever it might be. It's going to be a little bit different for each person. So it's important to figure out, and play around with what feelings and what strategies help to make you feel better and feel calmer, or your child to feel better and feel calmer. And just knowing what the different options are. So having visuals like this sometimes can be really helpful. You can also find all over YouTube, or even if you want to purchase like physical things, Amazon has some great resources too, or I'm sure like the dollar store probably has them, where there's dice or cards that have different breathing exercises, kids yoga cards. I know there's really great, again, it's videos and cards that I've seen where they do, if it's kids yoga, where they're doing different like animal poses, to make it a little bit more fun, and less like what we might as adults think of as like traditional yoga, which might be better for some of our older ones. Again, it's just exploring and practicing, and then you as the adult practicing, and it might be initially just being mindful that you're not ready to engage and that you're just going, you know what, I didn't yell tonight when my child had this intense moment, and that's a win. And being aware of that is great. And then if you're able to just model that and say, hey, I can circle back to that situation later and say that wasn't, I was really angry in that moment, so I couldn't help you, but I do want to talk about it. And that's modeling for your child that it's okay to have those feelings, and it's okay to not in the moment maybe do something that would be expected, because we're only human and we're not perfect. And so that's just the reality of it, and that's just modeling for them that it's okay for them to not be perfect too. um, I want to give like more specific resources just in case. Again, I mentioned the Wholehearted School Counseling, but these are some different books that I used. I was elementary special education, so these are generally aimed at elementary aged students. But I know that like the Wholehearted Counseling did have, when I was looking around on her website, she did have some things for adolescents on there if you're looking for that. Um, but I know like with the little spot of emotions, they have a whole variety outside of this box set. The same thing with the Way Past, that's a whole series. Way Past Worried was just one that I was more familiar with. And then the last things I wanted to do is like, what could I do and do right now tonight without having to go purchase anything? Is if you have younger ones, there's Go Noodle. You do have to make an account, but it's free. It has movement, it has mindfulness, breathing, kids yoga, all sorts of different great things on there. And then there's also the Calm app, which I believe does have a monthly subscription fee, but some insurances have covered it, I've heard, but don't take my word for that. So I would follow up with that. They have underneath that a Calm Kids section, which again has mindfulness, breathing exercises, soundscapes, calming stories. So all sorts of different things for you to kind of access and help facilitate in beginning your mindfulness journey.
Awesome. I'm going to throw in two additional
Yeah,
resources
please do.
that like I personally like for myself to help. I feel like I'm always trying to not yell in response to my child yelling, and it just takes constant, focus on my own emotions. So 10% Happier is a podcast by Dan Harris, who that is really good, and it's mindfulness and meditation type topics, but guest speakers, and he keeps it really interesting. And then another one I really like is oh gosh, it is called The One You Feed, and it's named after that because there's a parable that I must say real quick, and then I know it's 8 o'clock and we'll wrap up, but it's a grandparent talking to a grandchild, and the grandparent is saying everyone inside of them has two wolves, the good wolf and the bad wolf, and the bad wolf is jealousy and anger and frustration, and all the we think of as bad emotions, and then the good wolf is love and peace and all the good emotions. And the grandchild says, and they're always at war with each other, they're always fighting, these two wolves, and the grandchild says, well, which one wins? And the grandparent says, the one you feed. And which I like that parable
I love that.
lot. And I heard the parable before I found the podcast. And so it's a lot of topics about what are you feeding, personally. which I think as a parent is so important, because it affects how we interact with our kids and what we're teaching them. So I'll just throw those two out as additional resources. They're both podcasts.
That sounds great. I might have to download them.
So thank you. We're out of time. Thank you, Lisa, so much. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening or watching this recording later. We hope that you leave this evening feeling like you're a part of a community of support and that you have more tools in your toolbox to manage your own mental health, and which will help you support the mental health of your family as well. Our next webinar will be Ask Us About Class In-Services on February 15th from 7 to 8. Join us to learn how class in-service presentation can help your child's classmates understand why their friend is frequently absent, is allowed to wear a hat, cannot play contact sports, or perhaps needs a rest period. An in-service is a lesson or activity that helps your child and their classmates feel more comfortable, answers curious questions, and shares ideas on how to be a helpful friend. Amy Fender, who is our Ask Education Support Navigator at Carilion Children's, will share about in-services for elementary, middle, and high school ages. So I hope that everyone can make it to that. And thank you again, and I hope you have a great evening.
Take care.